Ever wondered why your heartfelt apology gets you nowhere with some people while others accept the lamest "my bad"? Like it's a royal decree? Here's the thing nobody talks about. What counts as a real apology changes so dramatically across cultures that you could be accidentally insulting people while thinking you're being polite. And honestly, once you see how deep these differences go, every international interaction becomes a cultural minefield. Let's dive into the wild world of apology culture, because apparently saying sorry is way more complicated than anyone warned us about. Picture this scenario. You accidentally bump into someone on the street. If you're Canadian, you immediately launch into, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I'm really sorry about that." The other person, also Canadian, responds with, No, I'm sorry. I should have been watching where I was going, sorry." You both walk away having apologized 17 times for a collision that barely registered as physical contact. Now imagine the same scenario with a German. You bump into them, offer your Canadian-level apology, and they just stare at you like you've announced your life story to a stranger. They might nod, maybe grunt acknowledgement, and walk away. You're left wondering if you've somehow offended them further, when actually they just processed your apology, accepted it internally, and moved on with their day. Or try this with a Japanese person. Your casual "sorry about that" gets you a response so elaborate and formal that you start wondering if you've accidentally caused some kind of international incident. They're bowing, using honorific language, and apologizing for making you apologize. Suddenly, your minor sidewalk collision has become a diplomatic exchange. Here's where it gets really interesting. These aren't just different ways of being polite. These are completely different frameworks for understanding what apologies actually do and when they're necessary. Take Canadian apology culture. Canadians apologize for existing in the same space as other people. They say sorry before asking questions, sorry for having opinions, sorry for taking up time. It's not really about guilt or wrongdoing, social lubricant. Canadian sorry often means, "I acknowledge this interaction is happening and I want it to go smoothly." This drives other cultures absolutely insane. Americans find it confusing because they associate apologies with actual fault. Germans find it inefficient because it adds unnecessary words to every conversation. Meanwhile, Canadians are just trying to be considerate, and everyone else is overthinking their politeness strategy. But then you have Japanese apology culture, which is basically Canadian politeness turned into high art. Japanese people have different types of apologies for different situations, different levels of formality, different physical gestures. They're not just saying sorry, they're performing complex social rituals that maintain group harmony and acknowledge hierarchies. When a Japanese person bows deeply and uses formal apology language, they're not just taking responsibility for whatever happened. They're demonstrating respect for the other person, acknowledging the disruption to social order, and reaffirming their commitment to community stability. It's apology as social architecture. This creates some fascinating cultural collisions. Japanese people working with Americans often feel like American apologies are too casual and brief. Americans working with Japanese people sometimes feel like Japanese apologies are over the top and unnecessary. Both sides are measuring sincerity using completely different standards. Then you have cultures that barely apologize at all, and they're not being rude. They're just operating from different assumptions about personal responsibility and social interaction. Take Italian culture. Italians will express regret about situations. They'll show concern for problems, but they don't throw around apologies the way North Americans do. If an Italian bumps into you, they might say "scusi," but it's more acknowledgement than apology. They're not taking responsibility for existing in the same space as you, they're just noting that contact occurred. This makes Italians seem less polite to Canadian standards, but actually, they're just more precise about when genuine apology is warranted. They save their real apologies for situations where they've actually done something wrong, which arguably makes those apologies more meaningful. French apology culture is similar but even more selective. French people will apologize when they've genuinely inconvenienced someone, but they're not going to apologize for having different opinions or taking up space in public. Excusez-moi is functional politeness, not emotional labor. This drives North Americans crazy when they're traveling. They're used to constant small apologies smoothing every social interaction, and suddenly they're in cultures where people just live their lives without apologizing for basic human presence. It feels cold until you realize it's actually more honest. But here's where things get really complicated. Some cultures use apologies as manipulation tactics, and if you don't recognize the game, you'll completely misread the situation. Ever notice how some people apologize constantly but never actually change their behavior? They're using apologies as reset buttons, not genuine expressions of remorse. They say sorry to end conversations about their actions, not to take responsibility for consequences. This shows up in different ways across cultures. In some contexts, elaborate apologies are performed specifically to avoid real accountability. The more dramatic the apology, the less likely any actual change will occur. It's apology theater, and it works because most people mistake performance for sincerity. Meanwhile, other cultures show remorse through actions rather than words. They might barely apologize verbally, but completely change their behavior to prevent similar problems. They're taking responsibility through adjustment rather than explanation. This creates massive misunderstandings in international relationships. Someone from a verbal apology culture interprets minimal verbal apology as lack of remorse, while someone from an action-based culture interprets excessive verbal apology as empty performance. Both sides think the other isn't genuinely sorry. Here's what's really fascinating. Some cultures treat apologies as admissions of legal liability, which makes people genuinely reluctant to apologize even when they want to express sympathy. American business culture often works this way. People want to show concern about problems, but their lawyers have trained them that apologies can be used against them in court. So you get these weird corporate non-apologies. We regret that you had this experience. Or, we're sorry you feel that way. These aren't really apologies. They're carefully crafted statements that express sympathy without accepting responsibility. They satisfy legal requirements while completely failing to address emotional needs. This legal approach to apologies creates some absurd situations. People involved in minor accidents standing around not apologizing to each other because they've been trained to protect themselves legally, even when everyone involved just wants to acknowledge that something unfortunate happened. Compare this to cultures where apologies are explicitly separated from legal responsibility. In some contexts, saying sorry is seen as basic human decency that has nothing to do with fault or liability. You can apologize for someone else's bad experience without accepting blame for causing it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people have no idea their apology style is culturally specific. They think their way of handling apologies is universal human politeness, and everyone else is either too sensitive or not sensitive enough. Canadians think everyone else is rude for not apologizing constantly. Germans think everyone else is inefficient for apologizing unnecessarily. Japanese people think everyone else is socially clumsy for not understanding apology protocols. Americans think everyone else is either too formal or too casual depending on the situation. This creates some genuinely awkward international moments. Business meetings where people spend more time navigating apology expectations than addressing actual problems. Social situations where someone's attempt at politeness accidentally communicates disrespect. Romantic relationships where partners completely misread each other's expressions of remorse. I've watched Americans try to apologize to Germans using American emotional expression standards, then interpret German acceptance as cold rejection. I've seen Japanese people apologize to Italians using Japanese formal protocols, then get confused when Italians respond with casual dismissal rather than reciprocal formality. The worst part is that these misunderstandings compound. When your apology doesn't land the way you expected, you might apologize for apologizing wrong, which just makes everything more confusing for everyone involved. So what's the solution? Maybe we need to start treating apologies like any other form of cultural communication. Just like you might research business etiquette before international meetings, maybe we should research apology etiquette before international interactions. But honestly, that feels exhausting. Who has time to memorize the apology protocols for every culture they might encounter? Maybe the real solution is just accepting that apology miscommunication is going to happen and building tolerance for these cultural differences. Here's my controversial take. Most apology culture differences aren't about politeness levels. They're about different theories of social responsibility and community maintenance. Some cultures use apologies to prevent social friction. Others use them to repair actual damage. Some cultures see apologies as emotional expression. Others see them as practical communication. None of these approaches is inherently better, but they're definitely incompatible. When people from different apology cultures interact, they're basically speaking different social languages while using the same words. The really interesting question is whether global communication is pushing us toward apology culture convergence. Are we all slowly adopting similar apology standards, or are these differences actually becoming more pronounced as we become more aware of them? Maybe the answer is that apology culture, like everything else about human interaction, is messier and more contextual than we want to admit. Maybe the key isn't learning everyone else's apology rules, but getting better at recognizing when apologies are working and when they're just creating more confusion. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever had your apology completely misunderstood across cultural lines? Have you been in situations where someone else's apology felt either excessive or inadequate based on your cultural expectations? And here's the bigger question. In your culture, what makes an apology feel genuine versus performative? Is it the words used, the actions that follow, the emotional expression, or something else entirely? Drop your apology disaster stories in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how these cultural differences play out in real interactions. And if you think I've completely misunderstood your culture's apology norms, definitely let me know. If you enjoyed this cultural deep dive, smash that like button, subscribe for more mind-bending cultural insights, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Which culture should I decode next? See you in the next one.